You know that feeling? When you see a country doing well, growing, lifting people out of poverty, and you think, okay, great, they're really on their way. But then maybe things just sort of level off. Progress slows down. It feels like they've kind of hit a ceiling.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't tough enough, today's world is throwing these massive global curveballs at them, trade getting fragmented, huge debt burdens, this urgent push to go green.
Right.
It just feels like climbing that development ladder got incredibly steep all of a sudden, and maybe a little rickety.
Well, that challenge, of potentially getting stuck, that's what the majority of the world's population living in these middle-income countries is grappling with right now. It's not a small issue at all.
Absolutely not. And it's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today, looking at some really critical source material anchored by the World Development Report 2024. This report, it really leans into these challenges, and crucially, it tries to unpack how countries can avoid getting stuck and keep moving towards high income status, especially in this new global landscape.
Yeah, we've pulled together a bunch of sources, articles, research papers, the report itself, of course, to try and distill the most important nuggets.
Right.
Our mission, really, is to guide you through this expert analysis and figure out what it fundamentally takes to navigate that path from middle income to high income today.
Okay, let's get into it. We're going to start by really trying to understand the nature of this middle income trap idea, especially with those current global pressures we mentioned.
Right, the headwinds.
Exactly. Then we'll dive into the report's core framework. These two essential transitions countries need to make.
High strategies.
Yes. And we'll look at the underlying forces driving or sometimes hindering economic evolution, what the report calls creation, destruction, and preservation.
That Schumpeterian idea, basically?
Precisely. And finally, we'll explore the three concrete areas the report says countries must act on if they want to succeed.
It's definitely a complex journey, but understanding the pieces is vital.
Totally. So let's start with this concept, the middle income trap. The report's pretty clear. It's not some, unavoidable destiny, right?
That's right. That term, it came from a 2007 report originally, and it was always framed as a risk, a possibility, not some iron law.
Okay.
Escaping it really depends entirely on how countries adapt their policies and institutions as they get richer. Because, what worked to get you to middle income often just won't cut it to get you through it.
And what really jumped out at me is how the report emphasizes that the global environment today is significantly harder for these countries than it was for those that made the leap earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Much harder.
What are the big reasons for that?
Well, there are some major headwinds blowing, as you said. First, you've got these geopolitical tensions causing real fragmentation in trade and investment flows. And here's a pretty striking finding from the report. Globally, harmful trade policies, the ones that restrict or distort trade, are now actually outnumbering the helpful ones.
Wow. Harmful outweighing helpful, like the kind of disruption we saw after 2019 with restrictions on semiconductor trade. Is that the sort of thing?
Exactly that sort of thing. Those targeted interventions, they can severely disrupt the supply chains and the global integration that middle-income countries really need to upgrade their economies.
Okay, so trade fragmentation is one. What else?
Second, many of them are facing rising debt levels and rapidly aging populations, often at the same time.
A double whammy.
Yeah, and that duo, it tends to crowd out private investment, and it drains government budgets that are needed for, public goods like education or health. Debt service payments alone are projected to just soar for many.
They're more indebted than ever in a lot of ways.
Precisely.
Wow.
And the third big headwind is this accelerating climate action. It's necessary, of course, absolutely vital. But transitioning to a low-carbon economy requires just massive investments in new infrastructure, big regulatory shifts. And in the short term, before all the benefits really kick in, this can actually slow down productivity growth.
So you've got these internal structural challenges plus a tougher global debt kind of stacked against you. How does the report frame the way forward then? It talks about two crucial transitions.
Yes. It identifies two key sequential shifts that are needed to build the kind of dynamic economy you see in high-income countries.
Yeah.
The first is moving from what they call a one-eye strategy, which is primarily focused on just accelerating investment, moving from that to a two-eye strategy.
Okay, investment plus.
Yeah.
With second eye, infusion.
Infusion, that's a key word. And it means deliberately bringing in state-of-the-art technology, global market knowledge, advanced business practices from abroad.
Right.
But, and this is really critical, it's also about rapidly expediting their diffusion domestically, spreading it throughout the economy.
Oh, yeah.
It's not enough to just acquire it. You have to absorb it, adapt it, spread it around effectively.
Got it. So how does a country actually do that? How do you make infusion happen? What does it require?
Well, it needs several things working together. An openness, obviously, to economic ideas from the outside world.
Sure.
A strong secondary and vocational education system is crucial, so you have workers capable of actually using and adapting these new technologies and practices.
Makes sense.
And critically, a sufficient supply of skilled people, engineers, scientists, managers who can understand, apply, and tweak what's being infused.
The report has some great examples of countries managing this, doesn't it?
It does. The Republic of Korea is sort of the classic case study. Their incredible growth spurt in the 70s and 80s was fueled by both incredibly high investment and really aggressive infusion. Their industrial policy, it specifically incentivized firms to adopt foreign technologies, things like offering tax credits for royalty payments. And the large conglomerates, the cabal-alls, they were really effective at copying and adapting technologies, particularly from Japan in the early stages.
Right. So that was their successful infusion phase, their 2I phase.
Right.
And they later moved on to 3I, innovation.
Exactly. Once they'd really mastered absorbing and diffusing foreign tech, they shifted gears towards pushing the technology frontier themselves, and that's the innovation phase, the 3I.
Okay.
Chile is another interesting example of a successful infusion path. They reached high income status partly by diversifying their exports away from just mining.
Right. Copper?
And using institutions, both public ones like ProChile and private ones like Foundation Chile, specifically for knowledge transfer. A great example is how they adapted Norwegian salmon farming technology to their own conditions and became this major global salmon exporter.
Wow.
That's a really powerful example of infusing and adapting foreign know-how to build a whole new industry.
Using external knowledge to totally transform an industry.
Fascinating. Okay, so that's the first transition, 1I to 2I.
Right. Now, the second big transition is moving from that 2I investment plus infusion stage to the 3I strategy, which focuses on innovation. Right? This is where you're not just borrowing ideas anymore. You're starting to create brand new ones yourself, pushing the frontier.
Precisely. You start contributing to the global technology frontier. But, and the report really emphasizes this, you absolutely need the strong institutions that were built during that infusion phase to make this leap successful.
Right.
You generally can't just leapfrog this institutional development piece.
And attracting or maybe retaining the right talent must be absolutely huge here. The innovators.
Oh, vital. Absolutely vital. It requires a really vigorous exchange of human capital. That includes actively engaging with the diaspora, those skilled people who've moved abroad. And you also need to create the conditions that innovators actually value. Things like more open economies, respect for human rights, livable cities, intellectual property protection.
I remember the report mentioning a kind of cautionary tale about trying to skip that middle step, the infusion step.
Yes, Latin America is often cited, perhaps unfairly sometimes, but often cited as a cautionary example region. Trying to jump straight to innovation without first building really strong infusion capabilities and the institutions to support it, well, it can actually worsen the investment climate and potentially set countries back. You really need to learn how to effectively absorb and adapt global knowledge before you can realistically expect to innovate consistently at the frontier.
Okay, so those are the two big transitions, investment to infusion, the infusion to innovation.
Yeah.
But what's the sort of engine underneath all this structural change? The report brings in that classic Schumpeterian idea, right? Creative destruction.
Right, that ongoing process where new, more efficient ways of doing things emerge and displace the old ones. The report sees this whole process as being shaped by three fundamental forces, constantly interacting: creation, destruction, and preservation.
Okay, let's break this down. Creation seems straightforward enough. New businesses popping up, new ideas bubbling away.
It is, but the report offers a slightly more nuanced view. It's not only about brand new startups creating value. Existing firms, the incumbents, they're also crucial players. And often they're actually better equipped to infuse that new knowledge from abroad because they have the scale and capability.
Interesting.
And here's a really key finding. Something like 50 to 70% of aggregate productivity growth actually comes from simply reallocating resources labor, capital moving them from less productive firms to more productive ones.
Wow.
And those more productive ones could be new entrants or existing firms that are upgrading. So it's less about net job creation sometimes and more about just shuffling resources to where they can be used best.
50 to 70%.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk just from getting resources to the right place. Okay, so that's creation and efficient reallocation. What about destruction? Seems necessary, but maybe painful.
Destruction is the absolutely essential counterpart to creation. It's about eliminating those outdated arrangements. That means inefficient firms failing, old jobs disappearing as technology changes, obsolete technologies being replaced, or even rigid policies and old institutions being dismantled.
Right.
Without this destruction part, resources just stay locked up where they're unproductive, and they effectively block the way for new creation and growth.
And this destruction piece, this is often weak or actively resisted in middle-income countries? Is that the idea?
Precisely. Because there's often really strong opposition from incumbents, powerful established firms, influential groups, maybe political elites who actually benefit from the status quo. They might use their market power or their influence over government policy to prevent the necessary destruction of less efficient systems that serve their interests.
So they're actively working to preserve their advantages, to keep things as they are.
That's exactly where the third force comes in, preservation. This refers to all the forces that perpetuate social immobility and effectively prevent talent from participating fully in the economy. Often, this is driven by existing power structures and norms.
Okay.
The report identifies three main culprits here: norms, networks, and neighborhoods.
Okay, norms. Like social biases, discrimination.
Exactly. Deep-seated biases against women, against marginalized ethnic or social groups. These norms profoundly affect who can own businesses, what jobs people can get, how much they're paid, their access to education, even their ability to get financial services. Discrimination is an incredibly powerful force of preservation.
And networks. This feels very real in many societies. Who you know matters.
It really is. This is where connections, often family connections, or maybe old boy networks, determine who gets access to the good jobs, to essential services, even access to influence policymaking. It creates fundamentally unequal playing fields. The report actually cites opinion polls showing that in many countries, a majority of people believe connections, not merit or hard work, are the real key to getting ahead.
Wow.
And it gives specific examples, like in Malawi, studies showing men systematically refer fewer women than men to jobs through their personal networks, even when qualifications are similar.
That makes perfect sense, unfortunately.
Yeah.
If all the opportunities are embedded in existing relationships, you're just shut out if you're not part of the in-group.
Right. And finally, neighborhoods. This is about geographical disparities. Huge differences in access to quality education, to good jobs, depending on where you happen to live. Where you grow up can profoundly impact your life outcomes, especially for children who are exposed to those differing conditions over their really formative years.
There was that specific, quite stark example from the Rio de Janeiro favelas in the report, wasn't there? Box B 5.2.1, I think.
Yes, a very powerful illustration. The report highlighted research finding that residents in Rio's favelas often showed high educational mobility, meaning they achieved higher levels of education than their parents did.
Okay, so they were getting educated.
Right. But this didn't translate into occupational mobility. They really struggled to get formal sector jobs, largely because they lacked the necessary job networks outside the favela, and they were often geographically isolated from the city centers where many formal jobs were located.
Oh, wow.
So despite gaming the merit of education, these forces of networks and neighborhoods acted as really powerful preservation barriers, effectively trapping talent.
So you can get the skills, the piece of paper, but social and spatial isolation can just keep you stuck anyway. That's incredibly stark.
It is. And these forces of preservation, particularly things like network effects and policy distortions that favor the status quo, they directly impact how firms behave, too. The report contrasts the flat and stay dynamic, which is common in many middle-income countries like India, Mexico, Peru, where firms tend to just stay small, even as they get older.
Right.
Contrasting that with the up or out dynamic you see more often in places like the United States. There, successful young firms tend to grow really rapidly, and less productive firms, whether young or old, tend to shrink or exit the market.
And policy distortions actually contribute to that flat and stay problem, making it hard or unattractive to grow.
Absolutely. Things like high regulatory costs that kick in specifically when firms try to grow and become more formal, well, they can strongly discourage firms from scaling up.
Okay.
This hinders that crucial creation process at a larger scale, and it also prevents the necessary destruction of smaller, less efficient firms that maybe should exit.
Okay, so let me recap. The core challenge is avoiding this trap, especially with these tough global headwinds. The report's framework helps us understand the transitions needed in fusion, then innovation. And the underlying process is about navigating these really powerful forces of creation, destruction, and preservation, which often seems skewed towards preservation in middle-income countries.
That's a good summary.
So, given all that, what does the report say countries should actually do? How can they manage these forces and engineer those transitions?
Okay, so the report proposes three main areas for deliberate action. Three priorities, really, to manage these forces and try to evade the trap. There. Disciplining incumbency, rewarding merit, and capitalizing on crises.
Right. Disciplining incumbency, that sounds like directly confronting those powerful players, the ones who resist change.
It is, essentially. Look, incumbents aren't inherently bad. Large, established firms can add immense value, especially in infusion.
Sure.
But they can also use their position, their market power, or political influence to block progress and protect themselves from competition. So governments need effective mechanisms to keep them in check.
Like what? Stronger competition laws.
That's a big part of it. Robust competition regimes that encourage new entrants and prevent anti-competitive behavior. But critically, the report warns against policies that unfairly favor small firms just for being small, or that vilify large, productive firms just for being large. The focus should be on behavior, on contestability.
So keeping markets contestable is key.
Yeah.
Making sure new players can challenge the old ones.
Vital. Absolutely vital. Contestable markets put constant pressure on incumbents to compete, to innovate, to upgrade. This also means governments often need to reduce their own direct involvement in production where it's not justified and strip away outdated regulations, things like complex licensing requirements, minimum firm sizes that often just serve to protect incumbents from competition.
Like state-owned enterprises sometimes acting as blockers, especially in certain sectors.
Definitely. SOEs often dominate sectors like, say, fossil fuel electricity generation, and they can actively prevent or slow down the entry of new players, like renewable energy providers, for example. The report notes that state presence often significantly impacts market concentration and makes it harder for new firms to enter.
And competition authorities, the watchdogs, while crucial, they often struggle in middle-income countries, lack resources.
That's a major point the report makes. It highlights some successful anti-cartel actions in countries like Mexico and Colombia that clearly boosted innovation and productivity. But it also shows data, I think it was figure 7.11, revealing that competition authorities in many middle-income countries are severely limited in staffing and budgets compared to their high-income counterparts. So strengthening these institutions, giving them real teeth and resources, is fundamental to disciplining incumbency.
And this discipline, it isn't just for powerful firms, right? It applies to social incumbents, too.
Yes, absolutely. The report talks about weakening patriarchal gender norms as a key part of disciplining incumbency specifically, the sort of historical incumbency of men in dominating economic opportunities.
Right.
Increasing female labor force participation is crucial for growth and dynamism, and while there's been progress globally, it's still heavily hindered by these persistent norms in many places.
Okay.
The report also notes how leveraging multinational corporation supply chains can introduce a kind of external discipline and facilitate technology transfer, citing examples like Poland and Costa Rica where that's happened effectively.
And connecting with the diaspora, the skilled people overseas, is that also a form of introducing external perspective, maybe challenging the status quo?
It absolutely is. By creating pathways for skilled immigrants to contribute their knowledge, their capital, their connections back home, you introduce new ideas and a form of external challenge to entrenched ways of thinking or doing business. It helps turn potential brain drain into brain gain.
Okay, so action 1, disciplining incumbency. Got it. What's action 2? Rewarding merit. Sounds good, but what does it mean in practice?
Well, this means shifting policies away from, say, just targeting income distribution directly towards promoting activities that have positive spillover effects for the whole economy. It's about allocating talent, capital, and energy based on their actual value added or efficiency, rather than just based on connections or size or political favor.
And the report breaks this down, doesn't it? Merit for people, merit for firms, and merit for energy.
That's the structure they use, yes. For people, it's fundamentally about promoting economic and social mobility, making sure talent can rise regardless of background.
Hmm.
This starts right at the beginning with ensuring broad access to high-quality foundational skills through basic education. The report points to lessons from places like Finland and Chile, emphasizing the importance of focusing on assessment, understanding what works, and having a consistent long-term strategy for education quality.
And making sure the skills people learn actually align with what the job market needs.
Yes, exactly. Integrating work experience into education is key here through programs like dual training systems or co-ops, which you see in various forms in Ecuador, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia.
Right.
This helps align what people learn with real labor market needs. Denmark's sophisticated system, using local advisory councils and skill forecasting, is highlighted as a really good example of proactively aligning skill attainment and use.
What about higher education? Beyond just basic skills.
The report suggests broadening admission approaches, moving beyond just relying solely on exam scores. It cites examples in Brazil and some U.S. programs that consider factors like whether students come from disadvantaged backgrounds or are top performers from diverse schools. But critically, it emphasizes the need to ensure high-quality opportunities at all higher education institutions, not just the elite few. You need to build a deep, broad talent pool across the system. And also, supporting advanced learners, exposing children to science and innovation from an early age through programs like those seen in the U.S., Israel, and Spain, that's also seen as vital for building future innovative capacity.
And public R&D funding fits under rewarding merit, too.
It does, but how you do it matters immensely. Middle-income countries, on average, spend significantly less on public R&D than high-income countries. The median is around 0.3% of GDP versus 1.4%.
Big difference.
Huge difference. The report advocates for a strategic focus on key areas like STEM fields, health, the energy transition, but crucially with funding allocated competitively, based on merit and potential impact. Pakistan's competitive grant program is mentioned as an example.
Okay.
And strengthening those university-industry connections is critical for translating research into real-world value. Things like tax incentives for collaboration, Sri Lanka's example, well-functioning technology transfer offices, Brazil's Innova agency is cited, or science parks and incubators like South Africa's Shimalagang precinct. These are all mechanisms for knowledge exchange and helping new ventures get started.
Okay, so that's merit for people. What about merit for firms? How do you reward merit there?
This is really about rewarding firms based on the actual value they add, things like creating good jobs, boosting exports, infusing new technology, innovating, not just rewarding them for being small or having the right political connections.
Right.
And a major message here, quite a controversial one sometimes, is the warning against blanket, untargeted support for small firms, for SMEs.
That sounds really counterintuitive. Don't governments almost everywhere try to support small businesses?
They do, often with good intentions. But the report argues that broad, untargeted support, especially if it props up unproductive small firms, can actually be harmful to overall economic dynamism.
How so?
Well, if small, inefficient firms are kept afloat artificially with subsidies or exemptions, it prevents that necessary up or out dynamic we talked about. It stops more productive firms, whether small or large, from growing and displacing the less efficient ones.
Ah, I see.
The report actually cites evidence suggesting this can lead to reduced overall productivity. I mentioned total factor productivity, TFP, which is a measure of overall efficiency in places like Sri Lanka and Vietnam. It can lead to talent being misallocated, stuck in low productivity firms like in Mexico, and can even reduce the incentives for potentially high growth firms to actually grow, as seen in studies from Japan.
Okay, so the key is not supporting firms just because they're small, but supporting firms that demonstrate they can add real value, that have growth potential.
Exactly. Support the dynamic ones, the ones contributing positively, not just the small ones by default. And entrepreneurs, especially those with innovative ideas, they face huge challenges in many middle-income countries.
Getting funding.
Yes, big time. Difficulty accessing finance, finding mentors, getting access to markets, often due to information asymmetry. Lenders just don't know enough about them or lack of collateral. And the private equity and venture capital markets are often quite shallow in emerging economies. And the report notes women entrepreneurs often face even higher hurdles, more scrutiny, when seeking finance.
Are things like business accelerators helping to fill that gap at all?
The evidence suggests they do help, yes. Studies like the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, GALI, show they are particularly effective in helping ventures access debt funding. They kind of act like schools for entrepreneurs, providing crucial skills training and networking opportunities. Although finding truly effective mentors often remains a challenge, even for accelerators.
Okay. And finally, under rewarding merit, there was merit for energy. What does that mean in this context, getting energy right?
Yeah, it's basically about driving energy use, and especially the transition to low-carbon sources based on real costs and efficiency. This means, firstly, getting energy prices to reflect their true environmental costs, like through carbon pricing or removing fossil fuel subsidies.
Right.
And secondly, ensuring electricity grids operate efficiently, respecting the merit order, which means dispatching the cheapest available power first. In more and more cases, that actually favors renewables like wind and solar because their marginal cost of production is basically zero once they're built.
But the report mentioned that renewables often face higher costs in middle-income countries, right? Despite being cheap to run.
Yes, that's a key barrier. The cost of capital, the cost of financing these projects is often substantially higher in middle-income countries compared to high-income ones.
Why is that?
It's largely due to perceived risks, technology risk, market risk, and especially policy risk, like uncertainty about future regulations or support schemes. Reducing these risks is essential to lower the cost of capital, and the report also calls for increasing multilateral finance to support these long-term clean energy investments.
Okay.
But there are positive signs, too. The report mentions renewable energy auction prices hitting record lows in some middle-income countries, which shows the potential is definitely there.
Okay, so we've got disciplining incumbency and rewarding merit. The third big action area the report outlines is capitalizing on crises. Sounds a bit opportunistic, maybe?
Well, it recognizes a reality. Disruptive events, crises, whether economic, political, or even ecological, while obviously painful and damaging, can sometimes shake things up enough to break down the resistance of those preservation forces we talked about. They can open up windows of opportunity for necessary reforms and structural shifts that were just politically impossible before the crisis hit.
And the report focuses particularly on the climate crisis and the global energy crisis as potential opportunities.
Precisely. These crises are, by necessity, accelerating the development and deployment of low-carbon technologies globally. Middle-income countries have a real chance here to direct their investment, their infusion efforts, and eventually their innovation towards decarbonization.
How so?
Well, they could become key players in the emerging global green supply chains, producing components for solar panels, batteries, wind turbines, developing green hydrogen, etc. By doing so, they could not only boost their own economies, but also help lower the overall cost of decarbonization worldwide.
But there's a risk, isn't there, that protectionist policies in richer countries might actually shut them out of these green supply chains?
That's a major concern. The report flags, yes. Rising protectionist industrial policies in advanced economies, often aimed at reshoring green manufacturing, could seriously hinder this potentially beneficial globalization of decarbonization. There's a chart, figure 9.5, I think, showing a correlation between industrial policy measures and GDP per capita, suggesting richer nations are definitely more active in this space already. The report really stresses that global coordination is needed here to ensure middle-income countries can participate fairly and effectively.
And expanding low-carbon infrastructure within middle-income countries, building out renewables, upgrading grids. The report says that's economically smart, but faces hurdles.
Yeah, the analysis indicates it's often economically efficient in many middle-income countries, meaning the benefits outweigh the costs over the long run. But they face those significant challenges we mentioned. Legacy grid infrastructure that wasn't designed for variable renewables, and that higher cost of capital making financing difficult.
And why is getting this right in middle-income countries so crucial for global climate targets?
It's absolutely critical because of the emissions trajectories. In most high-income countries, efficiency gains and structural changes have largely managed to offset the emissions impact of economic growth in recent decades. Emissions have often stabilized or even fallen while economies grew.
Right, decoupling.
Exactly. But in most middle-income countries, economic growth is still the overwhelming driver of emissions growth, and the emissions reductions they are achieving aren't yet keeping pace with the impact of that growth. There's a stark chart, figure 9.11, showing that emissions growth in middle-income countries isn't yet decoupling from GDP growth in the way it has in many high-income countries. So if middle-income countries get locked into high-carbon development paths as they grow, meeting global climate goals becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible. One final thread the report weaves throughout all of this is the absolutely crucial need for better data and stronger analytical expertise within these countries.
Right, to actually apply this framework.
Exactly. To really apply this creative destruction framework effectively, you need good micro-level data, detailed data on firms, on individuals, to diagnose accurately where the specific problems lie. Where is preservation strongest? Where is creation being stifled? Why are firms not growing? New data sources, like from digital platforms, are emerging and offer potential. But you absolutely need the analytical capacity within government and research institutions to actually use that data effectively, to distinguish between genuine productive growth and, say, growth that's just based on exploiting strategic positions or rent-seeking behavior. Data alone isn't enough.
This has been a really, really deep dive. We've pulled out some absolutely critical insights from the World Development Report 2024, this whole idea of countries hitting a developmental ceiling, especially now with these unprecedented global pressures. It really is a daunting challenge.
It absolutely is. But I think the report's core message is ultimately one of maybe cautious optimism.
Yeah.
Getting stuck isn't some foregone conclusion. It really hinges on deliberate, targeted adaptation of policies and institutions as a country develops and as the world changes.
And that path involves consciously trying to manage those fundamental, often conflicting forces of creation, destruction, and preservation. It means navigating those transitions we talked about, from simply investing to actively infusing global knowledge, and then eventually building the capacity to innovate at the frontier.
Yes, exactly. And the report argues the way to do that is by taking concrete action in those three areas. Actively working to discipline incumbency, shifting towards genuinely rewarding merit in how talent, capital, and energy are allocated, and crucially, using moments of crisis not just to survive, but to push through necessary, sometimes difficult, changes.
It's clearly a complex process, but just so vital for the billions of people living in middle-income countries today. The report provides a clear, analytical roadmap. It highlights the deep-seated obstacles, for sure, but it also outlines these concrete pathways forward.
Indeed. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on that. The report highlights how these deep-seated forces, like social networks and existing norms, act as really powerful forces of preservation, right? Hindering progress by limiting opportunities for talented people who happen to fall outside the traditionally privileged groups. So if rewarding merit truly means opening up education, opening up employment, opening up business opportunities to all individuals who have talent, regardless of their background, how can societies navigate the incredibly difficult challenge of dismantling these preserving networks and norms without, creating new forms of social friction or potentially disruptive backlash along the way? That's a huge question.